Dwane Cates, this is a huge problem for Tammi Smith. You know, she can say all she wants about wanting to protect the child. Here, you're taking a court document and you're playing some funny business with it here.
Well, and her defense is, as she stated on a jail tape, when they recorded a jail tape between Tammi Smith and Elizabeth Johnson, that all she was doing was helping her fill out the paperwork. And the bottom line is it's not illegal for someone to help somebody else fill out paperwork. It happens all the time. I did family law for a long time. Somebody has better handwriting than the other person. They help them fill out the document. That's not a crime. Now, the crime comes in where there's false information. And the evidence that Beth discussed just a second ago about other people testifying that Tammi Smith asked them to use their name, that's the damning evidence. The fact that it's her handwriting on that document is really never been in dispute. Tammi Smith admitted that she helped her fill out the document.
She admitted it, and to me, you know, this guy, Craig Cherry, where does he come from? Well, it's Tammi Smith's cousin, first cousin. And he's already coming to court to say what he has to say, which is, it's not my baby. I never spent time with Elizabeth Johnson. Anyhow, we're getting ready for testimony to resume inside the courtroom. That means our own Beth Karras has to find her seat inside the courtroom so she can see and hear everything inside the courtroom. There, what a beautiful courthouse it really is out there in Phoenix. That's the brand new one. That's where all the testimony's taking place today. Who will be next on the witness stand? Well, you got to stick with us to find out here on In Session, your front row seat to justice. That's interesting, right? That the name pops up in conversation, then Elizabeth just grabs it. I guess that's part of the defense here. Dwane, do you think that's where they go? They say, hey, Tammi Smith, and that's why the handwriting, I think, becomes important as to who writes it. I mean, Tammi Smith knows that this is not true, that her cousin wasn't with Elizabeth Johnson.
That's the biggest problem that the defense has, is the forgery charge. And that's the reason they have a problem with it, is because if Tammi Smith's handwriting is on that document putting in the name of her cousin, and it's shown that Tammi Smith knew that her husband couldn't be the father, and then Cherry's testimony that he absolutely had no contact with anybody, didn't know anything about this. I mean, that kind of hangs her on the forgery charge. The good news is, in this case, if she can beat just one of the charges, she might be able to stay out of prison.
Why is that good news, Dwane? Is that just the criminal defense attorney in you speaking?
Well, the good news is that we're talking about the forgery, and there's a problem with the forgery. The custodial interference, I think the state's going to have a very, very difficult time convicting her of that. And the way the charges are structured, that if she only gets convicted of one or the other of these crimes, that she would be probation eligible. So gotcha. You know, it's always a good thing to keep your client out of jail.
I guess it is from your perspective. I understand and respect the job that you do, Dwane. I think me and Mike see things a little bit differently when it comes to criminal defendants. That when, you know, they're convicted and they don't go to prison or jail, it's not necessarily good news. And obviously there's some people who deserve a second chance on probation. And I don't know, if she's found guilty, maybe she is one that deserves a second chance.
But the bottom line is, there's still a baby missing, Vinny.
That's the biggest problem I have.
That's the bottom line.
And I don't know, I'm not convinced, Mike Brooks, that she was 100% up front with investigators when they're looking for this child about her communications with Elizabeth Johnson when she's in San Antonio. Because I think that's crucial, because I believe those two are in contact, and I don't know if everything that Elizabeth Johnson is saying she is conveying to authorities and to baby Gabriel's father.
No, I don't think so either. Because if she really wanted this baby that bad, I mean, they kept in contact. And the last time this baby was seen, it was seen at a hotel in San Antonio. Does Tammi Smith know more than she's telling? I think there's a possibility she may. Could some of that maybe come out in this particular case? Maybe in some of the phone records, some of the computer records. But there again, that remains to be seen.
Dwane Cates, you know, looking at the big picture here again, I always thought that looking at this case and why prosecutors pursued it, why they went after her, is because they saw her doing something illegal in their eyes, number one. But number two, it was a way to put some pressure on her to perhaps give up some information that she may have that would help them figure out what happened to baby Gabriel.
Absolutely, and they do that all the time. I mean, they expected her, I believe, 100% once she got arrested, to spill the beans to save her own, to save her own skin and tell what happened to baby Gabriel. I don't think she knows what happened to baby Gabriel. There's no evidence whatsoever that Tammi Smith had anything to do with Elizabeth Johnson going to Texas, with Elizabeth Johnson taking the baby to Texas, with what Elizabeth Johnson did with the baby while she was in Texas. I mean, there's just absolutely no evidence whatsoever about any of that. All the evidence is basically about this forgery and what happened here in Arizona.
Let's take a listen to more of Craig Cherry. Again, this is Tammi Smith's cousin testifying. His face is not shown because he did not want it shown. So obviously we complied along with the judge in not showing his face, but you can see his hands and you can absolutely hear his testimony. Dwane Cates, looking at the big picture here again, I always thought that looking at this case and why prosecutors pursued it, why they went after her, is because they saw her doing something illegal in their eyes, number one. But number two, it was a way to put some pressure on her to perhaps give up some information that she may have that would help them figure out what happened to baby Gabriel.
Absolutely, and they do that all the time. I mean, they expected her, I believe, 100% once she got arrested, to spill the beans to save her own, to save her own skin and tell what happened to baby Gabriel. I don't think she knows what happened to baby Gabriel. There's no evidence whatsoever that Tammi Smith had anything to do with Elizabeth Johnson going to Texas, with Elizabeth Johnson taking the baby to Texas, with what Elizabeth Johnson did with the baby while she was in Texas. I mean, there's just absolutely no evidence whatsoever about any of that. All the evidence is basically about this forgery and what happened here in Arizona.
Let's take a listen to more of Craig Cherry. Again, this is Tammi Smith's cousin testifying. His face is not shown because he did not want it shown. So obviously we complied along with the judge in not showing his face, but you can see his hands and you can absolutely hear his testimony.
Did you give anyone permission to use your name on that court document?
No.
Do you know Elizabeth Johnson?
I do not.
You've never met her?
No.
Okay, so it's safe to assume that you are not the father of her child?
Yes.
All right, that's super clear for the record, and they had to establish it through his testimony. But this guy, he doesn't know Elizabeth Johnson. The only connection or nexus to anything, Mike Brooks, is that he's Tammi Smith's cousin.
That's it.
Tammi Smith had a name and either gave it to Elizabeth Johnson, mentioned it in front of Elizabeth Johnson, or actually put it on the paper for Elizabeth Johnson.
Right, and that's the whole thing. Elizabeth Johnson didn't put it on that paper for herself. He has nothing to do. There's no connection whatsoever. They didn't even know each other, much less him possibly being the father of baby Gabriel.
Yeah, that is super, super clear. All right, let's take a listen now to Gary Duplessis, and this is a Tempe police investigator, talking about speaking with Craig Cherry or trying to track this guy down, because this wasn't the easiest witness to find. And he didn't want his face shown. This guy didn't want to testify to begin with. Take a listen.
It appeared to me that he was hiding from us. We were eventually able to find him with some help of coworkers, I believe. And we then learned after meeting again with Mr. Cherry that he had left a voicemail the night before canceling, trying to cancel our appointment with him on that day.
All right, Mike Brooks, I'm sure you've run into this before, right? Someone who just doesn't want to cooperate, doesn't want to get involved, doesn't want to get subpoenaed.
Once or twice, yeah.
Doesn't want to testify. So I wouldn't read anything into it beyond the fact that this guy maybe has a little bit of a track record with authority, and, I don't want police hanging around me.
Right, exactly. And, because he doesn't have a great track record with law enforcement. But it could just be because he didn't want his face shown. Look, I don't want to get involved. I've been through enough. Here's Tammi Smith dragging him into this. He said, I have nothing to do with this. And that's the bottom line. So, yeah, once you've had a little run-in with law enforcement, You don't want them coming to your door. You don't want people seeing them coming to your door. You don't want them coming to your place of business, you know, where you're working, because what does that say to the employer?
Yeah.
So I kind of don't blame the guy.
I understand it. And Dwane Cates, this is a guy who, when we really look at it, did nothing, absolutely nothing, but is involved here because of his cousin.
That's true. I mean, he didn't do anything. I mean, you know, and he did absolutely nothing. And by Tammi Smith putting his name on that document, he's right smack dab in the middle of this case.
All right, let's take a look inside the courtroom, can we? Is anything happening? Not yet, but in probably less than 5 minutes, the judge, the jury, the next witness, the attorneys, Tammi Smith, all inside that courtroom, and you'll see it live right here on In Session. I understand it, and Dwane Cates, this is a guy who, when we really look at it, did nothing, absolutely nothing, but is involved here because of his cousin.
That's true. I mean, he didn't do anything. I mean, you know, and he did absolutely nothing. And by Tammi Smith putting his name on that document, he's right smack dab in the middle of this case.
All right, let's take a look inside the courtroom, can we? Is anything happening? Not yet, but in probably less than 5 minutes, the judge, the jury, the next witness, the attorneys, Tammi Smith, all inside that courtroom, and you'll see it live right here on In Session.
In South Beach, there's one family that has the hottest ticket.
Welcome back to In Session and our live coverage of Arizona versus Tammi Smith. I'm Vinny Politan. Great to have you aboard this afternoon. We are just moments away from testimony resuming inside that courtroom, and as soon as it does, we'll take you in live. That is a live look at the Great Seal of the state of Arizona. And obviously, when they pull back the camera and the judge takes the bench, we will show you everything that happens inside the courtroom. In the meantime, I got Dwane Cates, great criminal defense attorney, joining us from outside the courthouse in Phoenix, Arizona. Also, Mike Brooks with me here in studio as we take a look at everything that's taking place inside the courtroom. I want to go back to some more testimony from Gary Duplessis from the Tempe Police Department. Here he is talking about a tip line call. Take a listen.
You learned about a telephone from a neighbor named Gabriel Salas, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you learned that Elizabeth had used his phone.
That's the information I was provided. Generally speaking, they were able to tie down a time frame where they thought the phone had been used by Miss Johnson.
And that was prior to Miss Johnson leaving for Texas.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, phone records may be crucial here, Dwane, in tying Tammi Smith to Elizabeth Johnson, whether she's on the road in San Antonio or perhaps even before she leaves with baby Gabriel. And one way they're attempting to get into figuring out what Elizabeth Johnson was doing and who she was talking to is through this neighbor's phone.
That's right, and you know, and we expect to see phone records. Now, I haven't heard anything about Tammi Smith's number being on those phone records. They can also do what they call pings on cell phones. They can pretty much tell where somebody is when they were talking on, when they made a call, from which cell towers the cell signal bounced off of. And so I've used that a lot of times in criminal cases to put people in certain places at certain times. And I would expect there's going to be all kinds of phone records in this case.
Bottom line, Mike Brooks, from my experience, juries love phone records. I always talk about this one case I had where the phone records were completely irrelevant to everything, but the jury wanted phone records. I understand it. And Dwane Cates, this is a guy who, when we really look at it, did nothing, absolutely nothing, but is involved here because of his cousin.
That's true. I mean, he didn't do anything. I mean, you know, and he did absolutely nothing. And by Tammi Smith putting his name on that document, he's right smack dab in the middle of this case.
All right, let's take a look inside the courtroom, can we? Is anything happening? Not yet, but in probably less than 5 minutes, the judge, the jury, the next witness, the attorneys, Tammi Smith, all inside that courtroom, and you'll see it live right here on In Session.
In South Beach, there's one family that has the hottest ticket.
Welcome back to In Session and our live coverage of Arizona versus Tammi Smith. I'm Vinny Politan. Great to have you aboard this afternoon. We are just moments away from testimony resuming inside that courtroom, and as soon as it does, we'll take you in live. That is a live look at the Great Seal of the state of Arizona. And obviously, when they pull back the camera and the judge takes the bench, we will show you everything that happens inside the courtroom. In the meantime, I got Dwane Cates, great criminal defense attorney, joining us from outside the courthouse in Phoenix, Arizona. Also, Mike Brooks with me here in studio as we take a look at everything that's taking place inside the courtroom. I want to go back to some more testimony from Gary Duplessis from the Tempe Police Department. Here he is talking about a tip line call. Take a listen.
You learned about a telephone from a neighbor named Gabriel Salas, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you learned that Elizabeth had used his phone.
That's the information I was provided. Generally speaking, they were able to tie down a time frame where they thought the phone had been used by Miss Johnson.
And that was prior to Miss Johnson leaving for Texas.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, phone records may be crucial here, Dwane, in tying Tammi Smith to Elizabeth Johnson, whether she's on the road in San Antonio or perhaps even before she leaves with baby Gabriel. And one way they're attempting to get into figuring out what Elizabeth Johnson was doing and who she was talking to is through this neighbor's phone.
That's right, and we expect to see phone records. Now, I haven't heard anything about Tammi Smith's number being on those phone records. They can also do what they call pings on cell phones. They can pretty much tell where somebody is when they were talking on, when they made a call, from which cell towers the cell signal bounced off of. And so I've used that a lot of times in criminal cases to put people in certain places at certain times. And I would expect there's going to be all kinds of phone records in this case.
Bottom line, Mike Brooks, from my experience, juries love phone records. I always talk about this one case I had where the phone records were completely irrelevant to everything, but the jury wanted phone records. They wanted to see the phone records. Where are the phone records? And we had to tell them, listen, they're not in evidence because they're irrelevant. But here, very relevant, because you're trying to figure out what is that connection between Tammi Smith and Elizabeth Johnson? How much communication were they having? How, were they conspiring together? And if you could put together a serious list of phone calls for this jury, you can get a lot closer to being able to argue and prove that.
Phone messages, phone calls, and text messages, and emails between the two from the time they met at the airport and started even discussing anything at all about baby Gabriel, Vinny. And that is, and Dwane is absolutely right. They want to see that. As you said, they love that. There's no DNA evidence, which doesn't, not in this particular case. Well, it could be for paternity, but we know that's not Cherry, is not the father. But phone records are going to be extremely important on what they exactly have between the two.
Yeah, I think this jury is going to be interesting when it's time to deliberate, right? When they're in there, they've got the court documents, they'll be examining handwriting, trying to figure out themselves, matching together some phone records. And I think this is an opportunity for a jury to actually have things that they can look at for themselves to figure out and try to piece together. Does that person's testimony make sense in light of what I have in front of me? Now, you mentioned text messages. Detective Duarte talked about that. Take a listen.
During the time you were present there, did you have conversation with Tammi Smith about communication she had had with Elizabeth Johnson prior to your arriving?
Yes.
Did she provide you with information that she had received text messages from Elizabeth Johnson?
Yes.
Did she provide those text messages to you or the other officers who were present?
Yes.
Did she tell you the last time she had contact with Elizabeth Johnson?
Yes.
And did you document that time in your report?
Yes.
All right, Dwane, what if these prosecutors are able to demonstrate, and this is an if, right, that Tammi Smith was not telling them everything that she knew, was not telling them about all of her communications with Elizabeth Johnson, whether it's relevant to the charges or not? Do you think that then, is going to be impossible for the defense to overcome through the testimony of Tammi Smith if she's not telling investigators everything that she knows, all of her communication with Elizabeth Johnson?
The communications are key to the conspiracy charge because conspiracy requires communication. Actually, conspiracy to do anything is based upon the fact that two people agreed to do an illegal act and that they took some step towards that act. So the only way they can prove that Tammi Smith conspired with Elizabeth Johnson to commit custodial interference is to show that there was communication between Tammi Smith and Elizabeth Johnson right before she left, as she was leaving, on her way to Texas, all that. I mean, somehow they're going to have to show that these two people agreed that Elizabeth Johnson was going to take that baby out of state and deprive the father of custody of his child. And I haven't heard anything, rumors or otherwise, in this case that's going to suggest that they're going to be able to do that.
It's difficult because if, in fact, there was some sort of conspiracy and conversations like that, if they're not recorded, only two people know about them, and one of them's locked up, she's not going to be on trial until September. The other is the defendant, who obviously would deny that. Mike Brooks, what does your gut tell you here about Tammi Smith and about ultimately what was on her mind? Because on the one hand, you've got, all right, this theory of conspiracy to get the child deprived, Logan McQuarrie, of his parental rights. On the other hand, you have her saying, I just wanted to make sure baby Gabriel was okay.
We know that she's adopted one child already. And it's going to be interesting to see if she can get up on that stand, Vinny, and convince that jury that her intentions were for the safety of that little baby, and that above all. And I think that's what's going to come here. But I think Dwane's right. It's going to be tough making a conspiracy case rock solid. Forgery case, I don't think that's a big problem. But the conspiracy case, to see that she conspired with Elizabeth Johnson, if she can convince the jury that it wasn't a conspiracy, she was doing it to make sure that baby was safe and would remain safe through all the craziness of this custody battle, she might be able to beat that one.
Yeah, Alexander Pena, a Tempe police officer, also testified, and this is on cross-examination. And as you listen to this part of the testimony, this plays right into the defense theme of their case and makes Tammi Smith, the defendant, look good.
There's no mention in that report that she wasn't helpful, is that correct?
Correct.
That's because she was helpful. Okay.
Correct.
There's no mention in that report that she was belligerent, correct?
Correct.
That's because she was not belligerent, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. There's no mention in that report that she was hiding stuff, is that correct?
Correct.
That's because you had no reason to believe that she had anything to hide.
That's correct.
All right, if she's helpful, not belligerent, not hiding anything, Mike Brooks, that builds up her credibility and helps her when it's time for her to tell her story because, hey, folks, remember Officer Pena? He told you how helpful she was. And she came into court and she answered all of my questions, all the prosecutor's questions, and answered all your questions as well.
That's huge for her. That's a defense witness right there, Officer Pena. But, yeah, and especially if she can get up herself and sell herself to the jury that she had nothing to do, or that she didn't believe that there was she was involved in any kind of criminality at all, especially on the conspiracy charge.
Dwane Cates, ultimately, do you think this is a witness, Tammi Smith, who, when she testifies at trial, will be consistent with the testimony that we just played, where she's helpful, not belligerent, and just someone who's not hiding anything.
That's her theory of the case, and I was a little shocked when they promised that she would testify in this case, because even if you're considering putting your client up to testify, you never promise, because you never know what's going to happen between the time the trial starts and it's time for your client to take the stand. And if you promise they're going to take the stand and they don't, then they will hold it against you, even though they're told they can't. So, but you know, that was a great cross-examination technique about what wasn't in the report, and he got the officer to admit that what wasn't in the report, just like it was in the report that she was cooperative, and that was in the report. You know, that was a great cross-examination technique, and it was very helpful to the defense.
Absolutely helpful. Makes her look good. Makes Tammi Smith look good. Let's take a listen to some more testimony. This is from Detective Aguilera here talking about the adoption.
Sergeant Carlton advised Elizabeth Johnson that we were there to try to determine where baby Gabriel was. She advised Sergeant Carlton that the baby had been adopted, and then retracted that statement saying, well, he hasn't been adopted yet.
Did she identify to you who were the people who were supposed to have been adopted or were adopting?
Yes, she did.
Who did she identify?
She identified the female as Tammi Smith and her husband.
Dwane, how about that testimony?
Well, you know, it's just the truth. I mean, it shows that Elizabeth Johnson is a little bit off, which I think everybody kind of agrees in this case.
Agreed.
Fact,
Mike, agreed?
Yes, I agree.
We all agree to that, Dwane.
Yeah, so, you know, and that just kind of confirms that, and it was just the truth. I mean, you know, she said it was the Smiths that were trying to adopt the baby, and the Smiths were trying to adopt the baby. I don't think they have to run and hide from that statement, because I think everybody knows it.
All right, folks, we're waiting for live testimony to resume. And many of you, as we take a look at the Great Seal of the State of Arizona, you might be thinking, what takes these people so long? Why do they start so late in the day? Why don't they start on time? What's wrong? Are these people lazy? No, quite the opposite, folks. This judge, let me tell you, a lot of judges, when it's time to do a trial, they'll just do the trial. But not this judge. He's still handling a whole list of other cases while he's doing the trial. So he's handling those other matters right now. When he completes those, then he'll jump right in and start the trial. So it's actually the opposite. This is like the hardest working judge that we've had here on In Session in quite some time.
That's the big question.
That's a big
a whole lot of craziness going on here, Vinny.
Yeah, Dwane, as you listen to that conversation, does it sound like both sides trying to sort of protect themselves, create some sort of defense because they both know that they're in some trouble here?
You know, it might. You know, I don't know for sure that they know they're being recorded on this.
Oh, really?
I don't know if Elizabeth Johnson's smart enough to know that she's being recorded, or if Tammi was savvy enough to know that she was being recorded. But in any event, I don't think that this phone call hurts Tammi Smith very much. In fact, it kind of plays into her defense, which is, I'm just helping her fill out the paperwork. And like I said before, it's not illegal to help somebody fill out paperwork. It's not even illegal to put false information into that paperwork. It becomes illegal when that paperwork gets filed with the court.
Yeah.
So if I'm if I'm Tammi Smith's attorney, I say, hey, I was giving her an example of how to fill out the paperwork so that she could fill it out herself later, and that she filed it and I didn't know she was going to file it. That'd be my defense.
All right, let's back away, though, from the immediate charges here, back to the big picture, which is the one question, and the one and only question that people really want answered from all of this, which is, what happened to, where is baby Gabriel? In that conversation, Dwane, it's very clear. Elizabeth Johnson says, well, you set up this adoption. You know who they are. I don't. You set it all up. I mean, that is an incredible accusation right there.
It is an incredible accusation, and it's just that. It's an accusation. It's the only time in everything that I've read and everything that I've looked at where that accusation is made, is that it was Tammi Smith's people that did it. Now, again, we're going to have phone records, and we're going to look at all the other stuff, and there may or may not be further evidence to that. But, you know, it might be Elizabeth Johnson just floating her theory of the case.
Well, and here's the thing, Mike Brooks, when you think about Elizabeth Johnson and phone calls, she seems to say things on phone calls that she knows will get a reaction from the person on the other side. When she's talking to Logan McQuarrie, she says, I suffocated him. I smothered him. I put him in his diaper bag. I put him in the trash, right? And is that true? Is that not true? And then in this conversation, she's saying, no, you set the whole thing up. See, I have a real difficult time understanding or knowing when to believe Elizabeth Johnson. You know, we know she has mental issues. That's why her trial's been delayed to a certain extent, that and switching lawyers 4 times. But from an investigator's point of view, how tough is this to figure out? This is Tammi Smith. We're getting word from inside the courtroom that the jury is getting close to entering the courtroom, getting seated. We have reports of the lawyers sitting down, so we expect at any moment live testimony will resume. In the meantime, I want to go to Dwane Cates, criminal defense attorney, joins us live from outside the courthouse. Dwane, here's my impression of jurors in Maricopa County out there in Phoenix, Arizona. Conservative, not necessarily the most friendly to all the arguments made by criminal defense attorneys. Am I right? Am I wrong?
You're right. I try cases all over the state of Arizona, and Maricopa County has some of the most conservative jurors around. You know, you have a lot of people that retire and move here from the Midwest. You have
well, that's a double whammy, right? You got folks from the Midwest who are generally conservative, and then they're at the point in their life where they've heard it and seen it all. All right, that's strike 2. Okay. So who do you look for? I mean, if you're a criminal defense attorney out there, who are the folks in Maricopa County that, hey, I try to get at least a few of these folks on my jury?
Well, you know, I don't necessarily shy away from the retired people. I mean, you got to do a good job of voir dire and ask the questions that you want answers to. And the good news is with that jury pool, they generally will tell you the truth about what they think. You know, so you just got to kind of weed through them and find the ones that you think can be fair and impartial.
Yeah, that's all we want, right? We want them to be fair and impartial, and if they have have their minds made up before they enter the courtroom, then they should not be in the jury. Now, how about this case locally? How much has it been played up or not so much? You know, especially I'm talking about Tammi Smith's involvement here. Do you think that at all is an issue or could be an issue here?
I don't think it is. You know, I think this is a bigger case nationally than it is locally, especially where Tammi Smith's concerned. You know, with Elizabeth Johnson, I mean, everybody kind of knows who Elizabeth Johnson is around, but the Tammi Smith part of it, you know, when this whole thing broke, she was on TV quite a bit. She was making statements all the time, and it was kind of a big deal there. But you know, it just disappeared in the news cycle, and you know, it's still covered by the local news stations, and it's on the news at night. But when I talk to other lawyers around the courthouse and stuff, they go, "Oh, this trial's going on," and so you know, it's not overwhelming.
That's interesting. And Mike Brooks, you know, the other place where this was a big story and still is a huge story is San Antonio, Texas.
Yeah.
Because that's where the search was. That's where that landfill was that they searched looking for baby Gabriel. That's where those photographs inside the hotel room are. That's where this child was either killed or given away to a couple. And, you know, it's unusual to have a story where you have 2 cities like this, but I think this might actually be a bigger story in San Antonio.
Oh, it's huge there. And I can tell you because the chief of police there, Bill McManus, he and I used to work together in Washington, D.C., you know, and he was front and center of this investigation, especially when they were there at the landfill. They were demanding, well, why didn't you search the landfill earlier and everything, and those kind of things. And no, it is still big news in San Antonio. And people in San Antonio, it's a total mystery what happened to this little child. I can guarantee you, those investigators in San Antonio, they want more than anyone to find out where little baby Gabriel is. Was little baby Gabriel left there in that city? Did somebody come and take her across the border possibly? They just don't know.
Yeah, and the time I spent there, you know, covering this case, which is, you know, years later, right?
Yeah.
But still, when I went to the bus station and they saw a camera, hey, you know, this is all about that child. And anytime you mention the story about the child, you don't even have to say his name. They know who you're talking about, baby Gabriel. That's the way that community got so invested in trying to find this little child, and really because of those photographs right there on the bed. So Dwane, as Tammi Smith continues her trial here, if she's found guilty, okay, can she be subpoenaed and compelled to testify in the case against Elizabeth Johnson?
Well, you can always subpoena somebody. The question is whether or not she'll plead the fifth when she takes the stand in that case, and she always could, because you don't know if there's other criminal liability. I mean, if the baby's dead, she could be a murder suspect. So if I were her attorney, I would advise her to take the fifth and not testify if called in the trial.
So does she, by going on the stand during her own trial, sort of waive her right to say, hey, I plead the fifth?
Only in this case. So
only
anything
here.
she says in this, yeah, only what she says in this case can be used against her, and absolutely will if she says something that's incriminating. However, if she's called in a subsequent trial, you can't compel somebody to give testimony that might incriminate themselves, and that's what it would be, and I believe she would be able to take the fifth.
Yeah, that's going to be the fascinating part about this, Mike, because ultimately, Mike, you know, for anyone following this story, you know, there's that huge unanswered question. And I believe investigators believe that she may know something, that, you know, Elizabeth Johnson may have said something. And when you listen to that phone call between the two of them, it just seems like there's this gamesmanship between them. And I don't know if either one of them is telling the truth necessarily. You know, it's obviously...